I used to think working at a 24/7 pet store was just about feeding animals and cleaning cages, until I uncover the truth. What happens after dark is stranger than you'd ever believe. I'm breaking the silence on the disturbing rules and hidden secrets behind those glass walls. My name's Evan, and 3 months ago, I took a job at Critter Haven, a 24/7 pet store tucked away between an abandoned laundromat and a boarded-up massage parlor in a mostly forgotten part of town. The sign out front still flickered. One of the R's burned out, so it read Crit Haven, which seemed oddly fitting after what I'd been through. I needed the job. I wasn't in a position to turn anything down. The night shift paid just a little more than minimum wage, but it came with peace and quiet. No management breathing down your neck, and no customers after midnight. On paper, it sounded perfect. Just me, the animals, and the gentle hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The first night, I even felt calm as I clocked in, listening to the soft rustle of bedding and the low purrs, chirps, and occasional squeaks echoing from the aisles. The store was long, narrow, and smelled like cedar shavings and warm plastic. Rows of enclosures stretched down both sides. Rabbits, birds, ferrets, hamsters, snakes, geckos, fish tanks humming gently along the far wall. Each section was dimly lit, the lights on a motion sensor to conserve energy. Sometimes the lights would flicker on by themselves, even when no one passed by. I chalked it up to bad wiring. The first hour of my shift was uneventful. I walked the aisles with a clipboard, checking off water levels, feed schedules, and cleanliness. Some of the animals were more active than others. Nocturnal, mostly. The sugar gliders blinked at me with wide black eyes. One of the parrots murmured something unintelligible and then turned away as if bored. About an hour in, I noticed something strange. A laminated paper stuck to the back door of the staff room with a magnet shaped like a paw print. It wasn't the usual cleaning checklist or emergency protocol. The header read, "Night Protocol. Do not deviate." There were 6 rules written in thick red marker beneath it. The first 3 were barely legible, smeared and fading. The last 3 looked like they'd been rewritten recently. 1. No talking to the animals. 2. Do not alter the feed schedule. 3. Cages must be cleaned in order. Never skip one. 4. Cover all mirrors after midnight. 5. Lock the reptile room. Don't open it until dawn. 6. If you hear scratching from aisle 7, leave the store immediately. I stared at it for a solid minute. I thought it was a joke, some prank the day crew played on new hires. You know, the kind of twisted humor retail workers come up with when they've spent too long surrounded by mouse bedding and bird seed. I took a photo of it on my phone, chuckled under my breath, and kept going. That night, I got through the shift with nothing unusual, aside from a dog bark echoing from the grooming room, where no dogs have been scheduled. I assumed it was a sound from the street or some old security system glitch. Still, it sent a weird chill through me. My second night, I was greeted by Kyle, the assistant manager. He looked tired, eyes rimmed red like he hadn't slept in days. He handed me a battered, leather-bound notebook. "Read this. Memorize it. Don't ask questions. Just stick to it," he said. It wasn't the official manual or a company handbook. Inside were handwritten notes, pages and pages of tightly packed cursive. Each one elaborated on the strange rules I'd seen on the door. For example, Rule 1, no talking to the animals, wasn't just about professionalism. It said certain animals remember voices. It warned that speaking to them could encourage mimicry. It mentioned a case where a parrot repeated an employee's words exactly, but weeks after the employee had left the store. In his voice, including things he'd said in private. Another note beneath it read, "If you hear an animal speak first, do not respond. Pretend you didn't hear it. Finish your task. Leave." That unsettled me. Not just the rule itself, but the tone. It wasn't funny. It wasn't exaggerated. It was careful, serious. By the end of my second week, I stopped laughing at the rules. I noticed things, tiny things at first. The fish in Tank 9 would turn in unison to face me whenever I passed. The rats in Enclosure B kept moving their bedding into distinct shapes, circles, then squares, then something like a crude pentagram. I rearranged it each night, and they rebuilt it without fail. One night, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror behind the supply counter. For a split second, I thought it blinked out of sync with me, just for a breath, but I couldn't be sure. Still, I found myself draping a towel over it around midnight, just in case. The breaking point came during my third Friday night shift. I had just cleaned out the guinea pig pen and was returning the scooper to the utility closet when I heard a soft whisper, "Evan." I froze. The store was silent except for the bubbling of the aquarium filters and the low hum of air vents. "Evan." This time it was louder. From behind me. I turned toward the parrot cage. The yellow Amazon parrot, Saffron, according to its nameplate, was staring at me with bright, calculating eyes. "Evan," it said again, voice low, gravelly. Then it cocked its head and smiled. Actually smiled. I didn't respond. I remembered the rule. I turned around, grabbed the mop, and walked to the back room without another glance. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the voice, my name, spoken in that same slow, mocking tone. I told myself it was just the bird mimicking something it had heard earlier. Maybe Kyle had said my name during shift change. Maybe it had picked up a recording. That's what I told myself. But part of me knew better. On my fourth week, I was working around 2 a.m., sweeping the aisle in front of the rodent enclosures. The store was darker than usual. Several lights had gone out entirely, leaving long stretches in shadows. My broom passed through something wet and sticky. I knelt down and saw a dark, thick smear on the linoleum. Blood. I followed the trail around the corner to find a cage wide open. The ferret was gone. Its door was unlatched, not broken, opened deliberately. Then I saw the paw prints, tiny, crimson, leading across the floor toward the back hallway where the grooming rooms were. I followed them, flashlight trembling in my grip. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. In the grooming room, the table lights were off. I flipped the switch, but nothing happened. The only light came from my flashlight beam as I scanned the empty tile floor. Then I saw the mirror. It wasn't covered. My reflection stared back, pale, sweaty, frightened. But then it smiled. I didn't. I ran. I locked myself in the stockroom and stayed there until dawn. When the morning staff arrived, I made up an excuse, said I'd had food poisoning and passed out in the back room. I told myself I'd quit. I'd never come back. But that night I returned. Something made me. Like the store was calling me back. Or maybe it wasn't the store at all, but something inside it. Something that watches. Waits. The next night, I found a new note tucked inside the rule book. It wasn't there before. You follow the rules. Good. Now we can trust you. I didn't know who he was. But that was the night I realized the rules weren't to keep the animals in check. They were to keep me alive. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the parrot smile. I replayed the sound of my name whispered in the dark and the smear of blood glistening on the tile. Something inside me wanted to walk away from Critter Haven and never look back. But I didn't. I came back. Part of me was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. On my next shift, I arrived earlier than usual. The store was still technically open to customers until 10 p.m., but hardly anyone ever came that late. Kyle was already there, staring blankly at the register screen. When he saw me, he didn't speak, just slid the battered rulebook across the counter and motioned toward the staff room. It felt heavier than before. Inside, I sat down and opened it to the pages I hadn't dared read yet. Each rule had a section beneath it. Some of the writing was rushed, smudged, or scratched out entirely. But what I could read chilled me deeper than anything I'd experienced so far. Rule 1. No talking to the animals. This rule wasn't as simple as I first thought. It wasn't just about preventing mimicry or behavioral disruption. It was about recognition. A note from an unnamed worker, dated 2 years ago, said, "Once you speak to them, they know you. They remember your voice, your scent, your shape. Don't let them imprint. Don't let them in." Another entry was Messier, scrawled in panicked writing. I said good night to the ferret. The next night, I heard something in my vents. It whispered my good night back to me, except I don't think it was him anymore. It sounded absurd, impossible. But after the parrot, I believed it. I believed every word. That night, I walked through the aisles in total silence. I didn't even hum to myself like I used to. I kept my mouth shut tight, even when one of the lovebirds chirped a familiar tune I'd whistled the week before. And still, the snake enclosure creaked open. Rule 2. Mystery feedings. At precisely 11:47 p.m., the back door clicked 3 times. It didn't open. No knock. No buzz at the delivery panel. Just 3 sharp clicks like someone trying to handle rhythmically. By now, I knew the sound well. It happened every night at the same time. When I opened the door, a cooler would be waiting on the concrete pad outside. No delivery van. No note. Just the styrofoam container, still cold with a faint trace of frost along the edges. Inside meat. It never looked the same twice. Sometimes it was gray, sometimes red. Once it shimmered like fish scales. Once it smelled like ammonia. But always vacuum sealed, and always in small, labeled bags. I was to feed them to specific animals. The rule book had a chart, 3 enclosures labeled only by initials. That night, the initials were CT, Cage 17, Back Wall, RS, Reptile Storage 2, not applicable, no location listed, just leave and grooming tub covered. There were no animals in Cage 17, not officially, but when I approached it, the temperature dropped. The air felt heavy, static dancing along my arms. I slid open the door just enough to push in the meat, sealed in its bag. The shadows inside shifted. I didn't look too closely. Reptile Storage 2 was worse. I didn't even have the key, only the master ring, and the lock hissed when I opened it. The terrariums inside were covered in black cloth. No labels. No windows. I fed whatever was under the sheet. I didn't want to know. As for the grooming tub, I laid the bag inside, covered it with a towel, and left. The next time I checked, it was gone. Nothing more. Just gone. Rule 3. The midnight cleanup. At exactly 12 a.m., all cages were to be cleaned in a strict order. As per the book, rodents first, birds second, reptiles last. No skipping. No rushing. I thought this rule was about hygiene. It wasn't. One former worker's note read, "Skipped the reptiles once. Got called into a cage by name. Saw something inside, something that looked like me, but it wasn't cleaning." Another wrote, Missed a cage. Found my mop head inside it the next night. Still dripping. I never left it there. So I cleaned. Every single one. Even the cages that weren't on the roster. Even the ones with no animals. Even the locked ones. By now I understood the store wasn't a normal pet shop. There were things here that didn't belong. Things that looked like animals but weren't. Things that wore skin like a suit and eyes like glass marbles. And still, I kept working. That night, while sweeping between the rabbit enclosures, I heard a soft thumping sound. A rhythmic tapping coming from the back of aisle 7. I remembered Rule 6. If you hear scratching from aisle 7, leave the store immediately. I froze. Every part of me screamed to follow the rule. But I didn't leave. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The sound grew clearer, definitely scratching now. Not from an animal. Not claws. Fingers. Fingernails against acrylic. I crept forward and saw it. One of the back cages, labeled out of order, had been pushed slightly ajar. Something inside moved slowly, brushing the walls from the inside with pale hands. Not paws. It looked like a small child, its skin gray, eyes pitch black and too wide. It tapped again. When I stepped back, the scratching stopped. Then it spoke. "Evan, you skipped my cage." I ran. I bolted straight into the staff room and slammed the door behind me, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I sat with my back against it, clutching the rule book like it might somehow protect me. Minutes passed before I opened it again, flipping through the pages frantically until I saw a torn page stuck between the entries for Rule 3 and 4. It was handwritten in a shaking scrawl. I recognized the handwriting, Kyle's. "Some cages can't be cleaned. They want you to open them. Don't. If you ever see the door open, close it. No matter what's inside. No matter what it says. Especially if it knows your name." I didn't leave the staff room again that night. I stayed until sunrise, staring at the cameras and watching for movement in aisle 7. Nothing showed up on the feed. Just static. The next night, Kyle wasn't there. Instead, a note waited for me on the counter. One line, typed and printed on plain paper. "You've survived the first test. Now it gets harder." There was something beneath it. A small parcel wrapped in cloth. Inside was a key. The tag read, "Reptile Room Access. Use only in emergency." Beneath, that was a final scribble in red ink. Some rules are meant to bend. Some are meant to protect you from the ones that break. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew the rules weren't arbitrary. They were warnings. Every one of them came with a cost if broken. Some costs were blood. Some were memory. Some might be my soul. And there were more rules I hadn't even touched yet. Ones I wasn't allowed to know. But I could feel the store watching me now. Testing me. And somewhere behind a locked reptile room door, something was breathing. Waiting. There was one animal that never scared me. Not once. Its enclosure was tucked between the chinchillas and a wall of sleeping cockatiels. A narrow acrylic pen with reinforced corners and a grated top, like it was designed to hold something much stronger than what it did. Inside lived a single red fox. Not a baby. Not a breed you'd find in any suburban backyard. Her name was stitched onto the small brass plaque by her water dish. Luma. The first time I saw her, I assumed she was part of a rescue program. Some exotic animal sent here temporarily, waiting for transfer to a sanctuary or a private collector. But no one ever came to claim her. She wasn't on any of the intake forms. She didn't appear on the feeding schedules. And most disturbing of all, her enclosure wasn't listed in the official store blueprint I found in the back room during one of my late-night catalog checks. It was like she'd always been there. And yet, officially, Never had. I didn't speak to her, of course. I'd learned my lesson. Rule 1 stuck to me like a second skin now. But Luma never asked me to. She just watched. And there was something in her eyes. Not the blank stare of an animal driven by instinct, but a knowing, a curiosity. She tracked my every move, tail curling delicately over her paws, head tilted with eerie stillness. When I came near, she didn't growl or whimper. She nodded. Yes, nodded, as if acknowledging me. I didn't feed her during the mystery feedings. She wasn't on the chart. I brought her standard cuts from the regular supply fridge. Chicken thighs, kibble, the occasional boiled egg. Every time, she waited patiently at the far corner until I placed the dish down and walked away. Then, and only then, would she approach. It was respect. One night, after a particularly grueling shift where I had to lock down an aisle due to unexplained water damage that hadn't come from any known source, I found myself sitting on the floor beside her enclosure. I didn't speak, just leaned my head back against the display shelf and stared at the dark ceiling, listening to the slow drip of condensation and the faint flutter of wings from the parakeet cages. Luma padded over to the edge of her enclosure, pressed her nose to the side panel, and sat, silent, still. With her there, I wasn't afraid. The next night, things changed. I just finished the midnight cleaning rounds when I found a new note taped inside the rulebook. It read, "Companions are rare. Cherish them, but don't trust them blindly." There was no signature, no handwriting I recognized. I looked up. Luma was watching me again. That same night, I heard scratching from aisle 7, but this time I didn't freeze. I went to her first. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe desperation, maybe insanity, but I stood in front of her cage and whispered, "Should I go?" Instant regret washed over me. I had spoken to the animals. I had broken Rule 1, but Luma didn't mimic me. She didn't repeat it. She simply stood up, turned in a full circle, and sat down again. Her eyes locked on mine, unblinking. It was like she'd said no. So I didn't go. And within minutes, the scratching stopped. I sat there, shaking, heart pounding, unable to believe what just happened. I'd broken a rule, and something had protected me. The question was, why? From that night on, I found myself visiting her first, before the reptile room, before the feedings, before anything. Luma became my compass. If she was calm, the night was calm. If she paced, I'd be on edge. If she didn't eat, I double-checked every camera feed. One night, she pawed at the latch on her enclosure repeatedly. Not frantically, but insistently. I thought maybe it was just boredom until I realized the air vents were humming wrong. A sound too low, almost a growl. The static cameras in the fish aisle blinked out one by one. And then came the smell. Sulfur. Wet earth. Something like burnt hair. I sealed the reptile room immediately, locked the staff hallway, and waited the night out under the glow of the grooming room's emergency light. The next morning, 3 aquariums were shattered. One was empty, but the cooler still arrived. That was the first time I saw a second name listed next to the initials. Luma, in bold ink. Her bag of meat was different, wrapped in silver foil instead of vacuum plastic, sealed with a strip of wax. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to give it to her. But she sat waiting, tail twitching. I placed a foil packet inside. She didn't eat it immediately, just sniffed it, pawed once, and nudged it into a corner. Then she looked back at me with that same deep, unreadable stare. Something passed between us. Not quite approval, not warning, either. Something deeper. Understanding. A week later, Kyle returned. He looked worse than ever. Sunken cheeks, red eyes, hair thinned like he'd aged 10 years in a month. "I heard you've been feeding Luma," he muttered, barely meeting my gaze. "She's not on the regular chart," I replied, "but she showed up on the mystery list." He nodded, slow and grim. "She earned it." I stared at him. "Earned it?" Kyle exhaled. "Some of them. They're not pets. They're wards. Guardians. Bound to the store. They keep the worst things in check." He didn't elaborate. Just handed me a new page for the rulebook. Rule 7. If Luma growls, leave the building. Do not wait. I didn't ask questions. I just taped it in with shaking hands. The next few shifts passed without major incident, but the bond between me and Luma grew stronger in strange, almost terrifying ways. Once, I caught her staring at the monitors behind the register. Her eyes followed the movements on screen like she understood everything she saw. Another night, I dropped my pen behind the shelving unit near her cage. When I retrieved it, there was something else behind the unit. A tiny, rolled scroll tied in red string. Inside it read, "She listens. She remembers. She chooses." That was all. I left it on the manager's desk. When I came back 20 minutes later, it was gone. The store itself began to react differently, too. Lights flickered less when I passed. The temperature normalized. The growling in the vents stopped. Even the delivery of the mystery meat became less frequent. Once every 3 days instead of every night. It was as if something had recognized I was no longer just a night worker. I was a part of the balance. Luma wasn't just an animal. She wasn't just a companion. She was a warden. Of what? I didn't know yet. But something in the air had shifted. A calm before a greater storm. Then came the night I almost died. It was 2:15 a.m. The cameras in the aquatic aisle went black all at once. I rushed to check them, glancing over my shoulder, flashlight in hand, when I felt it. Cold. Deep, unnatural cold. I turned the corner into aisle 4 and found it open. Cage 17. The one with no animal. No name. No listed occupant. I had fed it before blindly. But this time, it was open. A black smear ran along the floor. The scent of rotting leaves and wet stone filled the air. Something had escaped, and I saw footprints. Not paw prints. Bare human feet. I backed away, heart racing, every nerve on fire. Then, behind me, a low growl. I turned and saw her. Luma. Her eyes glowed gold in the dim light. Her fur bristled. She took a single step toward me, hackles raised. Then she snapped her head toward the back hallway and bolted. I didn't question it. I ran. I followed her all the way to the grooming room. She darted past the table, leapt to the counter, and began pawing at the cabinet below the sink. I opened it. As she climbed inside, there was just enough room for me. And when I heard the footsteps approach, slow, deliberate, too heavy, I shut the door behind us. We stayed there in the dark. I heard breathing, a voice muttering in reverse, the slam of a cage, glass shattering, then silence. Eventually, I emerged. The hallway was empty, but cage 17 was sealed shut once more, and the plaque on the door had changed. It now read, "Occupied, do not feed." Luma saved me that night. I broke the rule. I spoke to her. I trusted her, and she chose to protect me. But that doesn't mean she's safe. Because when I returned to her enclosure the next night, there was a new note inside her dish, written in the same strange, swirling handwriting I'd seen once before. She listens. She remembers. She chooses. But soon, she must decide. There was a time I thought the night shift was peaceful. There were no crowds, no screaming toddlers dragging their parents past the fish tanks, no clumsy teens trying to sneak a lizard out in their backpack. Just silence, solitude, the low hum of lights, the whisper of moving air, and the soft rustle of cages shifting as animals nestled into the dark. It felt sacred. For a while, I believed I'd found something rare, quiet time, a stretch of hours where the world paused, and I could be alone with the animals, their strange habits, their little quirks. I told myself this job gave me space to think, to observe, to find beauty in the stillness. But I was wrong. The silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. And the stillness, it was the breath the store took before something terrible moved again. I noticed a change about 2 weeks after the incident with Cage 17. Luma was restless. She no longer sat quietly in her enclosure. She paced, scratching softly at the corners, ears twitching toward sounds I couldn't hear. The rule book hadn't been updated since Rule 7. If Luma growls, leave the building. I kept waiting for the growl. It never came. But the quiet, it changed. It became too quiet. The hum of the filters in the fish tanks stopped during certain hours, just for a second. The sound of the air vents would cut out, and I'd realize I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Even the birds stopped making their usual fluttering noises. It wasn't just stillness. It was absence, as if something was erasing sound. One night, while organizing the supplies in the back closet, I dropped a metal scoop. It clattered, but there was no sound. I watched it fall. I saw it bounce. I watched the vibrations through the bag of litter it struck. But I didn't hear a single noise, not even my own breathing. I stood frozen, every hair on my arms prickling. Then, just as suddenly, it returned. The soft background noise of the store, the fluorescent flicker, the distant shuffling of animals. I looked down. The scoop was gone. There were other signs the perks of the night shift had turned sour. I used to love that I could observe the animals in peace. I saw patterns no one else noticed. How the snakes always turned toward the west wall after 1 a.m. How the sugar gliders lined their food trays in triangles. How the guinea pigs never touched the far right corner of their enclosure. But now, the patterns watched me. One night, I saw all the parakeets facing the same direction, the monitor above the register. When I glanced at it, I saw a live feed of myself from 10 seconds ago, walking into the aisle, turning my head, and staring at the camera. The timestamp was wrong. It read 3:03 and 3 seconds a.m. The next night, the timestamp repeated, again at 3 hours, 3 minutes, and 3 seconds. Same looped footage. My face, staring, and something behind me in the image. A tall shadow, leaning from the reptile room doorway. There had been no one there. The connection I'd once felt with the animals became something else, something I couldn't explain. I would wake during the day with images in my mind, blueprints of the store, sketched in charcoal, cages rearranged, a new aisle that didn't exist, and always Luma. In the center, I stopped dreaming in words, just shapes, eyes, symbols. The animals began behaving oddly. The chinchillas huddled in the corners of their enclosure and refused to eat when I entered. The rabbits thumped wildly for no reason when I walked past. The ferrets burrowed deep into their bedding and didn't come up for hours. Only the fish remained unchanged, always watching, always waiting. I stared into one of the tanks late one night, after restocking the reptile supplies. A silver tetra swam lazily past, turned and stopped. It pressed itself to the glass, its mouth opening and closing in slow repetition. Not gasping, not feeding, repeating. A shape, a pattern. I leaned closer. It was forming letters. E, V, A. Then it swam away. I felt dizzy, off balance. My ears rang with a frequency I couldn't locate. I backed away and found all the other fish frozen mid-swim, tails stiff, eyes unblinking. That was the last time I looked in a tank for the rest of my shift. I used to tell myself the solitude was a blessing. Then the quiet hours I could learn, connect, understand. But now I knew better. The quiet wasn't for me. It was for them, so they could hear. And they were always listening. Kyle returned one night without warning. I hadn't seen him in over a week. He didn't say a word when he walked in. He just headed straight for the staff room, leaving behind a trail of muddy footprints that smelled like pond water. He left a single envelope on the table and walked out. I didn't see him again. Inside the envelope was a photo, an old one, faded and cracked. It showed the pet store, but the sign read a different name, Whispering Pines Exotic Shelter. In the photo, Luma was there. Exactly the same color, same eyes. Dated 1981. No scratches, no wear, no explanation. Just a single line scribbled on the back. They don't age because they're not meant to end. They endure because we feed them. The night after that, the power cut out. Every light went dark. Only the red exit sign remained. I should have run, left, followed Rule 7. But I didn't hear Luma growl. So I stayed. I fumbled with my flashlight. It flickered, dying. Batteries new, but no use. I stood in the black, listening. Nothing. Then breathing, but not near me. All around me. Heavy, wet, close. And something moved, like paws on linoleum. Except they were too slow, too deliberate. I turned toward Luma's cage. Empty. The lock hung broken, the grate twisted like soft wire. Before I could scream, the emergency lights kicked on, just enough to see the trail of paw prints on the floor, leading into the reptile room, and carved into the wall beside the cage, in long, deep scratches. Evan. I followed them. Every step felt like it took hours. Inside the reptile room, the air was different, thick, metallic. A strange warmth hung there like breath. Cages rattled softly. None of them were covered. The center tank, the one I never opened, was shattered. Inside, at the bottom, lay the silver foil I'd once fed Luma. Untouched, a message was scratched into the glass from the inside. Not me. Then came a sound, a low snarl. Not from Luma, from behind me. I turned. Standing in the doorway was Luma, but not the one I knew. This one was wrong. Her fur shimmered strangely, like it was constantly shifting under light. Her mouth hung open slightly, too wide. Her eyes weren't gold. They were mirror black. She stepped toward me, and something inside me screamed, "Run!" But I didn't move, because another shape stepped out of the shadows beside her. The real Luma. Her hackles raised, her growl low. The two circled each other, a war of silent wills. And then, before I could stop her, Luma lunged. They clashed in an explosion of claws and shrieks that shook the floor. I turned and ran, through the grooming room, past the fish aisle, toward the exit light that flickered like a dying star. I didn't look back, not until I reached the staff room and slammed the door shut behind me. In the silence that followed, I sat against the cold floor, trembling. Something moved outside the door. I heard paw steps, soft, measured, then a knock. I didn't answer. The next morning, everything was back in place. Cages locked, Lights on. No sign of the shattered tank. No scratches on the wall. No broken latch. Only one thing had changed. Luma's cage now had a sign above it. Warden, do not replace. And on the counter beside the register was a new rule, burned into the wood. When they offer silence, it is not peace. It is a test. And most fail. I've stayed longer than any night shift worker before me. That's not pride talking. It's fear. Fear that if I ever do leave, something will follow me out into the world. Something that doesn't belong in the sunlight. Something born under buzzing fluorescent lights, raised in shadowed aisles, and fed in secret. There's a reason the store never advertises for night workers. There's a reason there's no job listing online, no application process. You're chosen, watched, called, and now I know why. The final shift began like all the others, with silence. But it wasn't the comforting silence I remembered from my first few weeks. It was the kind that makes your ears ring. That thick, oppressive stillness that feels like you're underwater, where sound exists but refuses to reach you. The kind of silence that comes right before a scream. Luma was already waiting for me when I clocked in. She sat perfectly still in the center of her enclosure, tail curled tightly around her legs, eyes half-lidded like she hadn't slept in days. Her food dish was untouched from the night before. When I approached, she didn't move, didn't blink. Only when I whispered, "What's happening?" Breaking rule one again, did she lift her head. She turned slowly and stared at the far corner of the store. Aisle 7. The scratching had returned. Not the occasional, irregular scuttling I'd come to dread. This time it was constant, deliberate, like something inside the walls wanted out. I rushed to the staff room. The rule book was still there, open to a page I didn't remember writing. My handwriting, but warped, crooked, like my hand had moved without my mind. At the top, it read, "Final rule, do not let the shift end." And beneath that, a single sentence scrawled in red ink. At dawn, the veil breaks. The rules reset. But if they are left unguarded, they walk. I didn't understand at first, but then it clicked. This wasn't just a job. It was a ritual. The rules weren't protecting the animals from me, or me from them. They were protecting the outside world. Because what we cared for inside these walls weren't animals. They were prisoners, and dawn was their jailbreak window. That night, everything failed. First, the automatic feeders jammed. The lights dimmed and never fully recovered, casting every aisle in a sickly amber glow. The monitors all looped the same 10 seconds of me standing in the grooming room, flickering in and out, repeating endlessly. But I wasn't alone in the footage. Behind me, a shape slowly rose. Tall, wrong, a silhouette in the form of a man, but with antlers curling like smoke, branching like trees. I blinked. The screen went black. I heard the first cage open around 2:04 a.m. It wasn't a latch. It was a snap, like tendons tearing. I rushed to the aisle and found the snake enclosure shatter from the inside. The boa was gone, but something else had taken its place. A trail of wet scales stretched down the aisle and stopped at the grooming room door. It was ajar, and on it, written in condensation from the inside, were the words, "Feeding time." I ran, not to the door, not outside, to Luma. Her eyes were wide now, alert, feral. Her fur bristled as she pawed the floor rapidly. She wanted out. I didn't think. I unlocked the enclosure. She darted past me like a red flame, heading straight toward aisle 7. And for the first time in my life, I followed her without hesitation. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe the ghost child from the cage. Maybe the mirror reflection that smiled when I didn't. What I saw instead was myself, not a reflection, not a mimic, another me, standing at the far end of aisle 7, grinning, pale, eyes black, teeth just a little too sharp. He tilted his head. "I told him you'd come," he said in my voice. "I told him you'd open the door." Behind him, cages began opening on their own, one by one, snapping, popping, hissing. Shadows poured from them like smoke, twisting, seething, crawling along the walls and floor. "You broke the rule," he whispered. "Which one?" I managed to choke out. He smiled wider. "All of them." Luma lunged. She didn't bark, didn't growl. She just hit the false version of me with the force of a car crash. They tumbled through the aisle as shelves tipped, glass shattered, and the air filled with that horrible sound again, like animals laughing and screaming in reverse. I backed away slowly, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And then I heard it. The clock. 4:57 a.m. Less than 3 minutes to sunrise. If the veil broke, if the store opened, if I didn't do something, they'd get out. I bolted to the front of the store and grabbed the emergency lockdown key. I had seen it once in training, buried under manuals and first aid kits. Kyle had mentioned it only in passing. Break glass. Insert key. Triggers a reset. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't care. I shattered the panel, shoved the key into the slot behind the register, and turned it. Everything stopped. The lights flickered once. The walls breathed. And then, total silence. No scratching. No breathing. No voice calling my name. Just the rhythmic hum of the ceiling lights returning to life. I turned to see Luma limping toward me, her fur soaked in black ichor that steamed as it dripped from her mouth. She stopped in front of me, looked up, and nodded. That morning, the sun rose gently over the roof of Critter Haven. The outside world never knew anything had changed. But I had. I called in sick the next night, and the next, and the next. But every time midnight passed, I couldn't sleep. I felt the rules in my bones. The need to watch, to feed, to clean. I couldn't stay away. I returned a week later. The register flickered to life as I stepped through the doors. A new note was taped to the counter. Typed. Cold. Precise. "Congratulations. You've been promoted." Title: Warden. Status: Permanent night shift. I looked toward Luma's enclosure. It was empty, but there in my old locker was a folded red uniform and a leash. Not for a pet. For me. I now understand the final truth. The store doesn't hire people. It absorbs them, one night at a time, one rule at a time, until you stop remembering who you were and start becoming what they need you to be. A keeper, a gate, a warden. And the rules? They're not for you. They're for what's waiting on the other side.